Welcome back to another episode of Trust in the Force. I'm your host, Vactor. I'm here with the co-host with the most, Kevin Cole. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing excellent because I'm going to be talking about Andor, the best Star Wars show in the history of the galaxy with my good buddy, Kevin Cole. Last week, we talked about the first 3 episodes, the first arc. This week, we're going to be talking about the second arc, episodes 4, 5, and 6 of season 1 of Andor. So if you haven't seen it, we're going to spoil it. So this is your warning right now. This is the Aldani Heist episode. Mr. Kevin Cole, what did you think overall about the Aldani Heist?
Well, it's my favorite arc of the entire season. And it came close because I do like the prison arc that we'll talk about next week. There's a lot of things I really like about that particular setup, but there's something about this one that really just, I think, had more gripping moments, more stakes. You know, it wasn't just, oh my God, what happens if they get caught? It was the heist crew, the trust issues, all of those things that sort of came about. There's so many moments within this arc that we'll talk about, like favorite scenes and things that stand out, you know, probably through this conversation. So I won't spoil that yet, but like it has to me some of the best character moments, the most stunning visuals. So I'll just sell this one. Like my favorite scene in the entire series is in this arc.
Oh, yes.
That's the one where he pilots the freighter through the eye and he's like dodging all the TIE fighters. And it's like this like crazy, stunning escape sequence that's just really literally out of this world. It's so good.
Yeah.
There's that one. You know, I just think that it's one of the most gripping Star Wars arcs I've ever seen. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can say anything else about so.
Well, spoiler alert, it is also my favorite arc of this entire first season. And I got to echo all of your sentiments, Kevin. This was a fantastic setup, payoff. Like, this was a perfect arc for me. And like you said, the visuals, this looks like, okay, they went to a real location. They filmed this. This is not on a green screen. Like, it shows, like, this is what we want. This felt like a movie. And at this point, when this arc aired, I was like, okay, the first arc was great, but this is on another level. I'm all in on this show, Andor season 1. So the very first episode, let's get into, was episode 4, titled Aldani. This was the introduction to the rebellion's first real operation, and Cassian, under the alias of Clem, joins Luthen's rebel cell on Aldani. This first episode, what were your thoughts, Mr. Call?
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, you're catching me here. I mean, there's so much to unpack. I think in the first episode, for me, it's the introduction, I think, of some of these rebellion characters that really sort of like gripped me a little bit. Like, okay, you know, we don't know much about these people, their backstories, but like it's such a interesting dynamic. You have this guy who really shouldn't have any trust of this rebellion at all and what's going on. And he's like thrust into this situation after Luthen sort of just like basically leaves him there. And I mean, it's just like, wow, what's going to happen here? What's the deal? And I think I remember watching this too, like when I was watching it the second time recently, and I was thinking about the first time I watched it, and I was like, you know, I remember sitting here thinking like, how does this all tie to Rogue One in the sense of like the version of Andor that we see in that movie versus the version that we see here.
And like you said, the introduction of this whole heist crew was the main, I think, thrust of the 4th episode. And we get to see her secret lover, Cinta, Lieutenant Gorn. We got the Thing, Ben Grimm himself, from the Bear.
Oh yeah.
We got Karis, Nemec, Cassian, and then Luthen. Man, all of these guys, they all bring their A games. Every single one has an interesting, compelling story. They've all got their reasons for being there, and they've all got, you know, the reasons for this forming Rebel Alliance that's coming up. And I think there's not a weak link in the bunch. It's like everybody just brings it. That they all have their A games out in full effect. So I loved introducing all of these new characters, meeting all these new people. And again, same thing we had with that first arc. I heard the criticisms. Oh, why is it so slow? This Andor is like, it's boring. And I'm like, this is like, I feel like the ADD generation. Like, let it cook, let it simmer, and give them time because it pays off. Like, all of this stuff is necessary to set up the storyline and to see what's coming.
Who is your favorite sort of non-Andor character in these episodes?
Man, I loved all of them, but I think first of all, we talked about Stellan Skarsgård on the last episode. He's operating on another level, and I think he just like there's something about what's going on with him, and he's got that scene where he's putting on his suit, like he's putting on his costume to his front to be this wealthy antiquities dealer, and like that, it's just in a nutshell, it's like this is his double life, his both sides of the coin. Again, that's why you cast Stellan Skarsgård. Like it's a masterclass in acting.
I thought
it's hard for me.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. No. Finish what you're saying.
It's hard for me to not like Stellan Skarsgård.
Yeah, I thought Mon.
Oh, yes,
we get to see her character for the kind of the first time in episode 4. Aldani
loved it,
and getting to see the political tensions with the Imperial Senate and like that component of the show, and then how it ties into Luthen, like you said, like he's putting the wig on and he's just like transforming himself into this sort of like antiquities dealer.
That scene was fantastic.
So good. Again, it kills me that he did not get a Emmy or something for this role. We missed that. I think the other call out for me is Deidre. Deidre Miro, the Imperial Security Bureau officer, and just like her introduction, because I think this is really one of the first times outside of Rogue One and some early scenes in A New Hope where we get to see disagreements within the Imperial ranks. We get to see the tensions within the Imperial rank. I mean, the first time we ever see it is A New Hope, right? And the guy's calling out Vader, your clairvoyance into the Force has not helped you conjure up stolen data tape, that kind of stuff. Like, and we saw a lot of it in Rogue One, of course, with sort of what's his name, Ben, what's his name's character, Admiral Krennic, just sort of starting to become unhinged,
Mendelsohn.
Ben Mendelsohn, and like, but this is a little bit more grounded, right? This is like workforce politics. This is intelligence officers who are disagreeing on intel and things like that. It just is very fascinating to see both sides. Like it feels like, again, I've heard people say this about Andor, this show would have been just as excellent if you took Star Wars out of it and even the sci-fi piece out of it. Like you could have set it in like modern day and it would have been like, oh, this is kind of a neat show. It has that Jack Ryan series kind of element to it. It has that Night Agent, those type of shows.
And a lot of people said that was a weakness of the show, of this is not Star Wars because it could be anything, right? Like you can take it out, you can take all the Star Wars pieces out and it would just be a regular show. And to me, that's a strength of the show. That's saying, hey, number one, Star Wars is anything. Star Wars can be anything. But then also, I want at the foundation, I want a good television show. So that's what this is. And then you sprinkle on top the Star Wars elements and the pieces. And that's what kind of combines the peanut butter and the chocolate for me. So I see that as a strength of the show. I know I've seen people say that is why it's not as good, because it's not as fantastical. It's not, Jedis and the Force and people swinging around. But to me, I think it's number one, that the grounded Star Wars, and it's like the Christopher Nolan Batman Begins-ification of these properties that we love, the sci-fi and fantasy elements of it, but on a more grounded personal level. That's what I love. And then also, like you said, just it's a great show. Like the acting, the directing, cinematography, like all of those little elements that piece together to have a fantastic show.
To quote our boy Luthen, wouldn't you rather give it all to something real?
Yeah.
I think Star Wars deserves a little realism, right? Like, I don't disagree with anybody who believes that the version of Star Wars we know and love is this fantastical space opera adventure, right? that's what we fell in love with. The pacing, the action, the fantasy. This show definitely is, it has pieces of that woven into it because it's within Star Wars, like that scene where the ship is going through the eye and TIE fighters are going. That's space fantasy. That's the sci-fi action component that the show brings. But the realism of a war where people are getting killed, rebel factions are being weeded out daily, politics within the ranks of the Imperial Security Bureau, to where if one of those people screws up, it's probably like Nazi Germany. They're going to die too. They're going to get shot in a back room somewhere, or whatever. And so it's like, you have Surreal Karn, our guy, like he's getting unhinged now, we're starting to see what's going on there.
Yes.
So it's like, I think Star Wars deserves a little bit of maturity. And so I don't hold to the belief that Star Wars always has to be this fun family adventure thing. I think there's areas of Star Wars that should be dark and interesting and worth exploring. I'm very critical of the Acolyte, but like the components of the Acolyte that I liked were the scenes where we see, Chimere, and remind me what the girl's name was, the main character.
Oh, now I'm blanking.
Yeah, I'm blanking too, but like, just sort of his seduction of her to the dark side by the end of it. I think those are areas. Yeah, those are areas that are worth exploring in Star Wars, while you can also explore the fun fantasy elements of it. And I will say this though, like
Andor is just the next step, the next evolution of that, and I love it. I love all of the stuff with Cyril, all the stuff with Deidre, and their whole. It's crazy because you have their side of it, like the Empire side, and then the and Luthen side. That is one side of it, and then Andor's. He's like there's an A story and the B story, and like both of them are interesting. Both of them are compelling, and you want to see what's going to happen.
Well, and these are
all
real.
Of these characters.
These are real people, and they all have different positions and stories within this world. And I think if you go back to our history books, the people on the Japanese Empire side that have told their stories of World War II and Pearl Harbor, they're just as compelling stories as the stories on the other side of the U.S. soldiers. Yeah. During the Nazis who survived, the ones who were really truly had a gun to their head, stuff like that. Like, I feel like, it's again worth painting a story with that kind of brush to where it's not just the heroes, right? I mean, you could almost be critical that that's the one thing about the Star Wars films that we don't really get, especially in the original trilogies. You don't get a deep sense of Captain Piet, what he's dealing with on a daily basis. Yep. We just know, hey, he's pretty uncomfortable having to follow Darth Vader around, and that, you never know when you're going to get force choked. And again, that's fine. I think, again, that was a hero's journey. It was a very, but people are craving these kind of stories right now. You look at some of the most successful shows in scripted streaming and cable, it's characters across all sides. Game of Thrones, for example, right? Yeah. You get just as much insights on the Starks as you do on the, what's the crazy family? I didn't watch all of Game of Thrones, but what was King Joffrey? What was the house that he's from?
For some reason, I was thinking Slytherin in my mind, but Joffrey... the Valerian?
I don't know. Peter Dinklage was his uncle, and guy was hanging out with a bunch of hookers.
But that's the same for me. That's I didn't originally find it interesting to say, this when Game of Thrones first came out, I was like, it's just another of these type of shows. But then once I got into it, I was like, it's the political intrigue, the houses, the game, who's going to land on the throne. All of those things were what kept me, and then the acting, of course, is what hooked me on Game of Thrones. It wasn't the setting, it wasn't the time period, like that wasn't interesting to me, but I ended up getting hooked on it, and it was for those very reasons. And I think Andor is the same way. The realism, the tension, and the character-driven storytelling, all of those things are what makes Andor.
And the stakes, right? Every choice that these characters are making or have to make, or situations that they're put in, they're very real stakes. Like, if Andor doesn't make a decision the way it needs to be made at that particular moment in time with all the things going on around him, he's dead. And, that's fascinating storytelling. I think all the credit has to go to Tony Gilroy. Like the fact that he has not been given anything else outside of Andor, and maybe some of that's by choice. He just loves this character and this specific world that he's telling. I don't know. Maybe after Andor season 2, maybe he'll get something else. I wish they would just give him the next saga trilogy and let him run with that. Like, what would we get if Gilroy was given the keys to the whole kingdom there? And, with Filoni sort of canon knowledge background, that kind of stuff. Like, yeah.
So let's get into the middle episode 5, which has my favorite title, I think, maybe of all of this series or this season, The Axe Forgets. This is, like I said, to me, I love that. What do you think specifically, Kevin, about kind of the pacing of the show throughout these episodes?
Well, you hit on something that I think is worth bringing up, and you said that the arrogance of the Empire, and it's stated by Luthen in the previous arc when he's interacting with Andor, like, how did you do it? How'd you get this? And he's like, what are you talking about? It was easy. I dressed up like one of them and I walked in and nobody said a word to me. They don't even look at you. They're so arrogant.
Yes.
They don't even know when you're stealing food off the table because they don't believe it could even happen. I feel like, that's exactly what we see kind of come to fruition in this arc, is like the payoff of that line from the first arc, because you really do see that. Like, what's her name? Deidre's boss, the old guy. He's so arrogant and so just like, this is nothing. Drop it. It's not a big deal. It's just a little rebel. It's a blip on the radar. We don't even need to talk about it. And it's like, kudos to her for not giving up on it, because she really, sees the pattern here. But it's like, yeah. And I think for me, this episode in particular, The Axe Forgets, really kind of like pays a lot of that off, I think, in terms of the pacing. But this is the first episode, I think, where it really starts to ramp up a little bit, and you have a lot of, he's starting his sort of betrayal. So those are areas that I think are just, again, it's just great writing. I think we're beating the horse to death on that, but I think the pacing in this episode is really good. And like you said, great title, right? The Axe Forgets.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, the quote in the show, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. And there's there's so much to that. There's so many layers to that quote.
Tell me
what it means
to
the show. If you are a tree and somebody comes and chops you down with an axe, you are going to remember the person who caused you pain, the thing and the person that caused you that hurt and that pain. And the person who's doing it, oh, it's just another day. I'm just chopping down some wood. This is my day job. And the axe is not going to remember that tree. And the rebels and all the people that the Empire has kind of taken out and wiped out, like, all that's what's seeding this rebellion. That's what's building this tension throughout the galaxy. And we hadn't seen it before in Star Wars, because obviously when we pick up with A New Hope, the rebellion's already formed, and Luke is really the only one that kind of goes on that journey, but everyone else is already like, oh, we hate the Empire. Like, this is not who we want to be in charge of us. So I really love that phrase and that sentiment of, you're the person who caused you harm, that, and it's causing that pain for you and leaving those scars. So I just love that. And specifically in this story, all these guys, every single person in the group has had something done to them and has a reason to be there. And I just, like I said, you're just building, slowly burning, slowly simmering until the pot overflows in that last episode 6. And that is that moment that you were talking about. I think visually, the spectacle of the eye, and also there's that moment where everyone stops, whether it's the natives, whether it's the Empire, everyone stops and looks up, and they're all kind of in unison with each other, and they're looking at the eye, and it's like, oh man, this is majestic. This is amazing. This is like, visually, this is what I love about this show.
I feel like, since we're jumping into now the final episode, like, this is almost kind of like an Ocean's 11, like, right, where we're getting sort of like, you start with,
which I love.
why are we doing this, to now how we're doing it, to now getting to see the payoff of everything. But what's different than Ocean's, 11 and some of these other movies is, people die. Not everybody's going to make it out of this alive. And again, like, I think if Rogue One did anything, it showed that, like, not everybody's coming out of this rebellion like Luke and Leia and Han and getting out of these impossible situations. It's just not going to work out that way, and we see the unfortunate, effects of this level of rebellion. It really paints, I think, to me, the people who don't like Andor or even Rogue One, I think, miss out on how it actually enhances more of the original trilogy's story. Because when you hear lines like many Bothans died to give us this information, or, the opening scene of New Hope where it's like, spies put the plans on the ship, like it brings more weight to those things, because now we know the stories behind that and the people that died. Now when you watch Rebels, like, we get to see in Rebels how all of these different rebel factions all kind of came together to form the alliance. Well, watching Andor, this is just a small piece of that overarching story. And again, people die. Like, this is war. There's not just collateral damage, but there's literal, like, sacrifice. I think this is just say plus storytelling, man. This is just, again, I don't want to oversell it and overhype it, but it's just, this is good stuff,
Yeah.
So
this is why we love this show. Like, you could tell just by the emotion and the sentiment in our voice. It's like, this means a lot to us. And it's when you have something special, you want to hold on to it. In Star Wars, and especially, in the last couple years in Star Wars, it's like the ones that the cream of the crop, I think, has been Andor and then Mandalorian, the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian. And those, I hold those in very high regards. Bad Batch is also very good, but it's Andor and Mandalorian that those are the ones that I think have had a cultural impact on people. My son knows Grogu more than anything else in Star Wars. Mando's everywhere. And when you hear people talk about, oh, what's great Star Wars? Andor. Like, I very rarely hear people talk bad about Andor. So this is the reason.
I wonder if the hardcore fans or the self-proclaimed sort of purists of Star Wars, I wonder if the reason why they don't like Andor is because it's a successful piece of creative that has attracted non-Star Wars fans to the world of Star Wars, to the universe of Star Wars.
Yeah, I wonder.
Sometimes, to put it in another way, and again, I'm generalizing, audience. I'm not saying it. But I could put myself in this. Growing up, if you were a Star Wars fan and you was very public about it, you sat on one side of the lunch table and the cool kids sat on the other side.
Right.
Well, now the cool kids are interested in Star Wars because of things like Andor. And now the kids that are sitting at the other end of the lunch table that have already been a part of it are kind of like, wait, what are you doing here? I feel like that's a little bit of what we're kind of see with Andor. When you have people like the Watch podcast, from the Ringer, who normally don't talk about shows like Star Wars, don't talk about things like Star Wars because they're more interested in talking about, more, quote, highly acclaimed or critically acclaimed content. Like, it brings a different audience to the world. And like, that's exciting, because anytime you create a piece of content, it's not just for the people who already were there, it's to attract new people to it. Right. And it's one of those things where it's like, people, who never had heard of Star Trek or seen Star Trek or cared about Star Trek. Like, that's the show my grandpa used to watch. Like, it was, guys in red and gold suits. Like, I don't know, they're watching that and they're like, oh, this was a good movie. I remember girls that were my age that were like, young 20 something girls that were like, I like this movie. He's cute, like, so it's like I think anytime a geek property becomes accessible to all audiences, I think the geeks just get really uncomfortable with that. Because like, wait a minute, this is ours. You can't have that.
Right.
You've got your own stuff. You got football and, all those popular kid things. You can't have this.
A lot of gatekeeping. I think that is true. There's some people that are like that. And then I also think there's that group of hardcore Star Wars fans that are like, well, it's not George Lucas Star Wars, so it's not Star Wars. Like George didn't come up with it, so it's not true Star Wars. I think that faction is going to slowly fade away. I don't think are going to be as beholden to Lucas or nothing. Like if it's not Lucas, then it's not Star Wars. As it slowly gets farther and farther away, I think it's going to be like Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek. It's like, yeah, that he was the creator and that was the genesis and the start of it. It's now evolved and gone into these other directions, and so
and now Alex Kurtzman is like really the gatekeeper, you know. Right. So it's like, and I do think that in Mandalorian, because they both have come out, you know, kind of at the interesting conversation that's come up, and we've talked about it in other shows, is who should be that gatekeeper of Star Wars moving forward. You know, there's the camp, the Filoni faction, and there's the Gilroy faction, right? People love Filoni because he's, you know, quote unquote George Lucas's apprentice. You know, he was apprenticing under Lucas, and, you know, self-proclaimed has a lot of history with George, you know, and when he talks publicly, he's always, well, you know, when George and I would talk, you know, this is what George's intention really was, and these kind of things. So we really made that happen. And, you know, and he really liked the character of Ahsoka and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, you know, Gilroy doesn't have that connection to Lucas.
Right.
You know, he's been given a mold and a place to play, a sandbox, and he's chosen to do something very different with it.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true.
They didn't like Ryan. They didn't like Ryan Johnson for that either. You know, so
yeah, it would. And we've talked about this before. I think it would help to have one central figure, a Kevin Feige type in Star Wars, where we know who is in charge, we know who is steering the ship, instead of it kind of feels like it's a little splintered right now. There's like Kathleen Kennedy has a side, the two that you just mentioned have sides, and it's like I wish we could just get one clear vision for what they want it to be. Whether that's, you know, whether I agree with it or not, at least have a vision, because right now we see it with the planned movies. Like it doesn't feel like there is a path forward right now and a set. Like the Rey movie, I don't know if that's happening. I don't know what's going on there. And then beyond the Rey movie, like, are they going to, you know, where do they want to set their attention on Star Wars? So
well,
I think
the good news
having
is
a clear vision.
Derek Hoffman has just been appointed as of February. So recently here, 13 days into the February, so sometime this month, he was appointed as Lucasfilm's new VP of development, focusing on live action projects. So he replaced Rain Roberts, who had been in that role, I think, since Disney had bought Star Wars. So basically that's Kathleen Kennedy's sort of number two, you know, or number one if you're more of a Star Trek fan. A little bit insight on Derek Hoffman. He was with the Donner's company. So Laura Schuler Donner, he worked extensively on the X-Men franchise. You know, he was a pivotal role in transitioning the X-Men franchise to television, co-executive producing the Legion series on FX, the Gifted series on Fox. So, you know, his team is going to be responsible for developing, you know, these live action adaptations. So maybe he'll help bring a little organization to chaos, especially coming from the superhero world. You know, how is this all supposed to connect and things like that?
Yeah.
But to your point, and we're getting off the rails because this is supposed to be an Andor recap, and I feel like we've gone in a lot of different directions. But like the thing that I think is really interesting is just, you know, there does need to be organization to the sort of chaos of content within the Star Wars, you know. But that said, I think Andor is a beacon of light in a sort of galaxy of darkness right now as it relates to all the different things going on the live action side of Star Wars, for sure.
Yeah, man, I am loving Andor, as we talked about, and season 2 is coming up. This arc proved, it solidified to me as I was watching it that I was in love with the show.
What's your favorite scene?
One thing, I think I'm going to go with the same as you, the eye scene. There's so many good moments in here. You've got the betrayal moment. You've got when Cassian decides, you know, what he's going to do and his decision to kill Skeen. There's all these different things about
Nimmick getting killed by the getaway ship, the credits or whatever falling on him. Ooh, man.
Yeah. There's so many good moments. And then actually, you know what? This was the one with the blue milk, the cereal with the blue milk, wasn't it?
I think
I'm
so.
trying to
Yeah.
think. This was yeah. Okay, never mind. That's my favorite. When Cyril pours the blue milk into this cereal, that was my favorite scene. I had to laugh so hard. But you know what? I really love that this does, and we didn't mention this, it kind of blurs the line between the traditional good and evil storytelling of Star Wars. Andor and also Rogue One, they both kind of they're in that moral gray area of your like almost like the Punisher in Marvel or people who are they're doing not necessarily great things, but for a good reason, a good cause. They're killing people and they're making these moral decisions, and we hadn't seen that in traditional Star Wars. This is really like a more, I think, a more modern take on that aspect of morality and Andor's approach to politics and rebellion and all of these things. It kind of blurs the line between, oh, is he a good guy? Well, he's doing some kind of bad things here. Because that was like even the very first time we see him in Rogue One, he's killing somebody.
It goes back to what I said earlier. It pays off the lines in the other content. You watch Rogue One and you see that scene where he's talking to Jen and he says, we've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion. Spies, saboteurs, assassins, everything I did for the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget, and I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in, a cause that was worth it. Without that, we're no better than the Empire. Like, when you hear that line now, and when you watch Rogue One, and you've seen Andor to this point, and we'll see a lot in season 2 as well, like so much more weight to that scene.
Yes,
because 100%. This is the part of the rebellion we didn't get to see, is the mistakes and the real piece of the rebellion. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I also love it, man. And I want to know, do you love it? I want you to share your thoughts down below. Let us know. This Aldani Heist arc, it's our favorite, Kevin and I's favorite of the season.
5 stars.
What about 5 stars from me as well? What about you, Mr. Viewer, Mrs. Viewer? What did you think of the Aldani Heist and season 1 of Andor so far? Let us know in the comments down below. Next week, we're going to be talking about the prison arc. So we are going to be very excited to talk about that, and we would be honored if you would join